Chapter 13. "Well, hello there," said a slightly surprised voice from the far end of the dimly lit space. At the end of the courtroom, several candles at the judge's bench spilled wax down the front and sides. Mounds of papers of various sizes were stacked neatly into piles, as if they had been sifted through. In the corner of the room, a cot surrounded by piles of canned goods, clothes, and other boxes of supplies sat next to crates used as nightstands, one of which had a plate with bones from a recent meal, chicken bones. "You found me." The man was sitting in the judge's seat. I looked around and saw only him, no one else. "I didn't know I was supposed to be looking for you," I said pointedly, and slightly irritated, being that I was reasonably sure those bones belonged to one of our chickens. "Oh, really? So, you're alone?" I eyed him, trying to get a bearing on what this guy was thinking. My own thoughts instantly roamed back to Saul and Lily. "Yes." "Well, that's a first." He lowered his head and continued to pore over his papers. Suddenly he stopped and looked back in my direction. "You're certain?" I studied him, suspicious of his reaction. He was seemingly unfazed at getting a visitor at this uncommon hour in our current situation. I hadn't seen any other signs of people on my way into town, and yet he was acting as if I was expected. "Yes. Are you all that's left of the town?" I asked, then bit my tongue, holding back the flood of questions I had. The flu was not, could not be responsible for everything that had happened in this town. The flu didn't set buildings on fire or flood streets with cars and leave them there. What happened here? "From where I sit, I can guarantee there are at least 2 people in town. As for the rest of the surrounding area, I can only speculate." He chuckled quietly, turning a page on the large document he'd been studying, then continued to address me. "I must say, you really should pay more attention. Questions like that may give people you meet the wrong idea." "And what idea is that?" I asked. He sighed and sat back in his chair as he rubbed the bridge of his nose in irritation. "It's clear, self-explanatory, and I'll even go as far to say obvious as to why not." I stared back at him blankly and awaited an explanation. "Maybe that you've been away with your head in the sand and failed to see the world fall apart around you for the past 8 months. He held up a set of building plans he'd been studying, enough for me to see the cover image. A crude drawing of what looked like a castle was sketched on the cover. Saul's castle. "Maybe held up in a mansion, with its own power source and a working shower. A place like that is a rare find these days. I always thought it was very convenient that the permit office keeps building plans on record. Makes my job that much easier." He carefully rolled up the plans and sat them back down in front of him. "Or one might think that you're just the most unobservant person in history. Even still, I have yet to bump into anyone who was on his own. Usually there's some tag-along boyfriend, girlfriend, sister, brother, or whatever to deal with," he said as he grabbed a bag of potato chips and started munching. I did my best to hide the tension I was feeling. I was almost certain he was the one lurking in our woods the other night. I kept a close eye on his hands as he casually reached for various items on his desk, as if he was suddenly self-conscious of his messy workspace. "It's a good habit, to be sure. Should you venture out alone, who would come to your aid if, in fact, you stumbled across some sort of calamity, such as falling down a ravine? Who's watching your back as you loot a house, or protecting you from a hostile inhabitant of an abandoned building? But yet you said you were alone, and I can only conclude that you are either lying or foolish." The man looked rough. His clothes were dirty and his hair was a mess. His overall appearance suggested he had recently been through some hard times of his own. His long-sleeved shirt, like the town, had seen better days. A simple shower would have done wonders for him. You sound like you're talking from experience, I said. He grinned knowingly. Forgive me for being rude, but it's been quite the night. These days you can't pass up a meal when one presents itself, am I right? He licked his fingers clean, then offered the chips. Would you like some? Disgusted at the thought of his slimy fingers having been all over the inside of the bag, I ignored the gesture despite how badly I missed potato chips. If what you say is true, then how is it you're alone? I asked, applying his own logic to his own situation. Gave up the ghost, I'm afraid, he answered quickly. As it turns out, you never can trust anyone these days. Seems that way, I agreed as I looked over the nest of supplies, not unlike those in the pack I used when I fled from my apartment. If you must know, we had an accident. I was hardly involved, he insisted through a long, drawn-out yawn. Okay, actually, I was directly involved, but I had good reason. I drew back, uncertain if he was kidding. No one would mention something like that so casually if they were serious, would they? He held up the building plans, which obviously belonged to Saul's house. My blood practically boiled over because he knew that much about where I came from, while I knew nothing about him. You have any idea how rare a place like this is nowadays? I've been searching for a while for a place to settle down. I'm always on the move. I couldn't believe my luck to find a house that was lit up. I could see the lights a ways off. Then I saw it with all the pre-plague luxuries. I was hypnotized by it. Once you've been without simple pleasures long enough, you start to wonder how you ever took them for granted. I thought that I must be going crazy. I'm tempted to agree with you, I replied through clenched teeth, still bitter about the chicken, but I held back my temper. Where did you come from? How did you get past the roadblock? I took a few more steps toward him. As I walked, I looked down the rows of seats and peered out the window at the street below. Roadblocks, he roared. There are no roadblocks, no police, no hospitals, no government, no National Guard to tell us where we can and can't go, no more people trying to contain or control the outbreak. All that is a thing of the past. Everything just faded away. The flu dismantled the government, silenced the news, and brought the military to its knees. The world that was just faded away. He paused, collecting himself by taking a deep breath. The look on his face displayed great loss, as if he was remembering the past few months in this one moment. And so abrupt and without grandeur. This is how our generation ends, he declared with absolute certainty. Things are quieter now. All that's left for us is to find a place to live out the rest of our days. So then what happened here? Sanitation, I assume, from before. Don't tell me you just now are leaving whatever hole you crawled in. Were you expecting to find the streets heavily peopled and rich with the sounds of a bustling town? He leaned over and glanced out the window at the abandoned street below. Nope, not exactly what we have going on here. You know, at first people thought that their pets might be the reason the flu got around so fast. Some uneducated hack watched a documentary on the bubonic plague and thought that it was spread by fleas on their animals. A panicked person gives little attention to the facts. It wasn't long before that rumor got out and people were slaughtering little Fido and Rex. This town actually had a truck that went around and collected the dead dogs and cats. What's funny to me is that it was the same truck that drove around and collected any people who got sick as well. Before long, the people all contracted the flu. If you ask me, the lucky ones were the ones who died from the fever. It was far better than dealing with the mass panic. Then the government stepped in to take care of the rest. The troops and police forces were made up of people, too. It wasn't long before they got sick as well. But there were always pockets of people who held on eagerly to make it through and be the last ones standing. but even they will turn savage when desperate enough." Then his face changed. The light went out of it, and he leaned forward, squinting in the dim light in an attempt to get a better look at me. The candles lit his heavily scarred face. "Soon, they were beyond reason and stopped at nothing to wipe out anyone they saw as a threat. Next thing you know, there were people calling themselves doctors, justifying killing the patient in order to stop the disease. But what happens when that group of people ventures out in search of food or other supplies and finds another group with resources they desire?" He grinned as he landed back in his chair. "One will either be eliminated or displaced, and then the cycle begins all over again." With the nagging feeling that I was being watched, I frequently turned around to check the dark corners of the room for any surprises. "Who are you?" I blurted out. "Me?" he squeaked back. "Would you like to know my name?" "Sure. Do you have a name?" I asked indifferently. "Yes," he said simply. "And what good is it to you, I wonder?" His sharp voice barked. "Will it reveal some mysteries to you? Will you hear it and then shout triumphantly, 'Ah, yes, I've heard of you'? Seriously, what a pointless inquiry, but I'm sure you can't help yourself. You're probably playing dumb. Or are you really that dim of a creature? Most likely the latter, but I assure you I have little patience for either. Or this is your way of making friends. Of course, how can you develop a relationship with someone without knowing first his name? It is, to be sure, the first brick in the foundation of a friendship. But I must decline. It would be quite the conflict of interest and of bad taste, you see." "I think you may have me confused with someone else," I said. "I don't think so." He turned to face me with the windows at his back. He picked up the neatly rolled building plans, handling them as if they themselves were precious. "Tell me, what kind of dogs are those you keep? I must say I've never much been a fan of dogs, and yours are exceptional guards. Especially that big gray one." I smiled, but neglected to inform him the wolves weren't ours. I couldn't wait to tell Saul the very wolves that had plagued his chickens were also keeping this creep away from the house. I thought back to the fires I had seen lighting up the night sky in the distance. It was still a long way off, but the glow on the clouds was visible from our rooftop garden, and the next morning, the overpowering smell of smoke filled the air. I wondered at how this man had survived, what horrors he'd witnessed or done himself to last all this time. Curiously, I stepped a little closer to him to get a better look. "How did you survive?" I blurted out curiously before I could stop myself. "As it turns out, I barely made it out with the skin on my back. Well, most of it, anyway." He held up his horribly scarred left hand. "In a panic, the hospital I was being treated in was burned, with its patients still inside, in a desperate attempt to stop the spread of the virus." "You were sick?" I asked, taking a couple steps back, not sure what to think of him. "Yes, but not with the flu. But that story will have to wait until another time. You could best describe my situation as displaced." "It looks like you've been busy." I nodded to the piles of goods in the corners. "Of course, starting over. Lately I've kept busy by consolidating my inventory. This building is the perfect pit stop on my way to something better. Not only is it built to last, but also in these small towns, the courthouse, police station, jail, and so on are all in the same building. You wouldn't believe the treasures that are downstairs in the police armory. With as many houses as there are around here, I thought there would be more supplies to go around. I've been rummaging through them one by one. To be honest, not much good stuff is left. Would you stop pacing about? I won't warn you again, you're making me nervous. You really don't know anything, do you? So long without a setback and you've become as brash as the mouse," he said longingly. "What are you talking about?" I was becoming more irritable with him. "You know, the little brown mouse. he shouted. Again, you lost me. I was not following his line of reasoning. There was once a little brown mouse that lived in a pub, he began as if he was speaking to a small child. Most of his life was spent avoiding the cat that terrorized his life. As a result, he spent most of his days staying out of sight. One day, the mouse came across some spilled whiskey on the bar room floor. After staring at it thoughtfully for some time, he decided to indulge himself. He sank down and started lapping it up slowly at first, but soon abandoned his earlier restraint. When he had drunk his fill, he sat back on his haunches while he twirled his whiskers, pleased with his current good fortune. Unknown to him, though, the cat watched from afar in the shadows. The last remaining moments of his life were spent marching through the halls, all the while roaring, "Bring out that mangy cat." I think it's time for me to go. I was growing tired of this man's company. Fine, he said, sinking back into his chair before I turned to leave. You wish to know who I am, what I was, and where I have been all this time. I was sick, that was what it was. The worst of it is behind me, but who knows for how long. There was a time when I hoped for a full recovery, but now there simply isn't the time. As far as where I have been, that is not important and a subject I wish to leave in the past. What is important, however, is where I am now, and that is at rock bottom. A man who has nothing to lose is a dangerous man indeed. There is nothing that could be done to worsen his situation, so he focuses on what can be done. Nothing else matters to him, and unless you have been in that situation, you won't know just how driven a desperate man can be. I think you made a great mistake. I'm not with any group and have no idea what you're talking about, I said, feeling a little sympathetic for the man before me who was clearly sick. Not with what had killed everyone in the streets, but perhaps something worse, something that infected the most important part of his body, his mind, leaving the rest of him to suffer through it without the release of death that the flu ultimately had. I'll tell you what, I'll tell you my name if you tell me the name of that blonde who goes for a swim every morning. It was then and there that I confirmed I didn't like this guy very much. Some piece of me secretly longed for the rifle I had left in my Jeep, but the rest of me screamed it was time to go. You want to know who I am? He reached for something out of my sight. I'm the cat. Finally, I saw what he was reaching for. I froze in disbelief as he pulled out a rifle that had been stashed close by, clearly gleaned from one of the troops outside. At the sight of it, I did what any sane person would do. Run. I turned to the door, slamming it shut the instant I was through it. Pieces of wood fell to the ground like ticker tape as the maniac unloaded the rifle in my direction. I cursed myself for even going in the room and not listening to my instincts to turn back. He was clearly sick, and even treated he was dangerous, especially with all the weapons and gear he'd acquired. I quickly darted to the door on the opposite end of the hall and wished I had my own gun. Don't make it any harder than it needs to be, the man shouted just before sending another steady stream of lead my way. I sailed down the stairs, hitting only 1 or 2 stairs before each landing. Hold still, and I'll make it quick. He shot more bullets down after me. It was like some kind of evil rain. The void in the center of the stairs flashed bright from the shots. It will all be over before you know it. I found myself cursing the troops who left their guns in the street for just anyone to find, even though I was sure they didn't have a choice, of course. In the main hallway, I ran as fast as I could, knowing my pursuer was right behind me. With my heart pounding so hard that it felt like it was trying to jump right out of my chest, I listened to the footsteps come down the stairs against my own panicked steps. By the time the door closed, I was already down the last few stairs to street level, running down the sidewalk to where I parked the Jeep. I made it halfway down the block, then jumped up on the roofs of cars to the other side of the street. You have a message you'd like me to pass on to your friends? He barked as he rattled off more rounds in my direction. I heard bullets flying by like angry hornets. I stayed crouched, adding a little pep to my step as I weaved in and out of the cars and making sure to keep my head low and out of sight. "How about this?" he yelled from behind one of the cars near the courthouse. "How about we start over? I promise things might go different." I stopped and leaned my back against a station wagon that was smashed into a truck. It blocked my way. I considered climbing over it. "No way," I said between breaths. I slipped out of my pack and shimmied under the truck, dragging my backpack through the puddle at the other end. With the Jeep now in sight, I turned to check if I could see him. I regretted parking so far away. I had at least 50 feet to cover across an intersection, the perfect opportunity for the psychopath following to kill me. I did my best to try and calm myself while I measured the distance, trying to find an easier way to get to it. I finally worked up the nerve, deciding sooner was better than later, and pulled myself to my feet. As soon as I started running, I heard the sound of his rifle's magazine hitting the ground, followed by a fresh one being slapped into place. With me in sight now, he let loose, dumping out the contents of his fresh magazine. I dove over the door just as bullets started to hit the Jeep, destroying the windshield and riddling the hood. My hands found my rifle on the passenger seat, and I opened the door and slid out the other side. Seeing the damage on the hood, I didn't even bother to try starting the Jeep. Instead, I kept low and moved as quickly as I could to the buildings on the other side of the street. I looked under the cars in the street and saw his feet making their way toward me. I jumped up and fired in his direction as I darted into a narrow alley between two buildings. Running as fast as I could, I tried to cover the distance to the other end before he made it to the entrance. After I dove down between two cars for cover, I sent some of my own rounds in his direction and hoped to hit his feet. "You can't run forever," he yelled down the dark alley after me. I turned to face him, drew my own rifle, and shot without hesitation, desperate to get away and back to Saul and Lily before he did. He had to be crazy to follow me at this point. But on the other hand, he was unwell. I emptied my rifle in his direction. The bright muzzle flashed off the cream brick walls as I saw him fall to his knees and pull up his rifle as well. I ran to where the alley turned sharply to the right. As the corner got closer, a sense of relief flooded over me. I felt the shot before I heard it. Just before I reached the turn, something hit my leg and knocked me off balance. As I stumbled into the wall, my leg failed to respond as it should. I also noticed it was suddenly stained red, as was the wall in front of me. I rolled to the side as more bullets buried themselves into the bricks around me. Trying not to panic, I focused on getting away rather than the newly acquired hole in my leg. I limped out of view and leaned heavily on anything within reach as I stumbled across the parking lot behind the shops. I was eager to widen the distance between me and the man trying to kill me. I promised myself as I tried to run that I would assess the damage as soon as I found someplace safe to rest. I looked back to see if I was being followed, but only saw a trail of red footprints. Suddenly feeling dizzy, I leaned against a car and slid down along the door to the pavement. I closed my eyes, and despite the agony it caused, I put pressure on the warm, wet spot on my pants. Feeling brave, I opened my eyes and saw a small pool of blood starting to form. I got to work right away, but hoped there would be time later for me to feel sorry for myself. I pulled off my pack and reached in the smallest pocket to get my knife, then cut off a chunk of my undershirt and balled it up right over the holes in my pants. I felt around my leg and found where the bullet had entered and exited my leg. Fighting the urge to scream, I bit my tongue as I slid my belt off and tightened it over the wound in an effort to stop, or at least slow, the bleeding. I wondered if my pursuer was hurt, how badly, and most of all hoped I'd never see him again. Struggling as I did, I pushed myself up enough to glance over the trunk of the car for signs of the madman, but I saw nothing. I refused to just give up and die on the pavement. If I was going to die from this, I would go out at least trying to survive. Reaching for my pack, I paused when I noticed something. There were 2 new holes through the smallest pouch. When I realized how close I came to taking a bullet in the back, I got to my feet, grinding my teeth from the almost unbearable pain. Standing up left me feeling dizzy from the loss of blood, but I made my way down the street and kept an eye out for a potential car to borrow. With my leg torn up, there was no way I would make it back to the house without passing out. My rifle became more valuable to me with every step. Not only was it essential for keeping me alive in case of another run-in with the man from town, but now I used it as a hodgepodge cane. I gripped the butt and put as much weight as possible on it to save my leg. Crude, but better than nothing. I started to wonder how long I would have to be gone before Saul got suspicious and came after me. Fearing that I would bleed out before I was missed, let alone found, I pressed on, running through my head what I would be leaving behind if I didn't make it. I focused on trying to figure out the most likely place I would find a car, rather than worrying about staying out of sight as I did on the way up here. I walked down the center of the street, looking up driveways and down the side roads. Surely most of the vehicles worked, but I had no idea how to start them. I stopped to rest on a swing suspended from a tree and checked my leg. The belt was so tight that it was starting to feel a little numb below that point, but I didn't dare loosen it and risk losing more blood. I couldn't help but wonder if this was how the deer that I hunted all winter felt, the ones that were only wounded and able to make an attempt at escaping as I tracked them through the snow. I let my eyes slowly close, feeling the toll the blood loss was causing. All my life I thought I would die young based on my family's history, but I thought it would be from something other than a gunshot. I struggled to my feet, tightened the straps on my pack, and continued walking through the yards with the determination to get through this. If I listened closely, between the crickets chirping and the uneven sound of my steps, I swore I could hear Saul already telling me, "I told you not to go to town. If only you had listened to me, you wouldn't have gotten yourself shot up and accomplished nothing in the process." He was right. My curiosity had gotten me in trouble in the past, and this was no different. Anyone I encountered from now on would be playing with a whole new set of rules and not bound to the old morals and ethics that held us all together in the past. It could be a potential nut job, more than happy to kill me just to get whatever supplies I might have on me. This man clearly had some bad encounters, and determined that the only way to survive was to be the first person to start shooting. I got to the end of the block and looked both ways to see if anyone was around. I crossed the street and noticed a house that had a steep driveway leading to an open garage door with a truck parked in it. Bingo. I limped in its direction, hopeful that it might be in working order. The driver's door was left open as if the old owners just ran in the house for one last item. I only hoped the lights weren't left on and had drained the battery. I cautiously approached the truck while scanning the area as best I could. It looked as if the owners were planning a camping trip, as the back was full of duffel bags and other supplies for such an adventure. With the truck all ready to go, I couldn't help but wonder what made them get this far but never proceed with their plan. After what seemed like an eternity struggling up the incline of the driveway, I slid into the driver's seat and saw the keys, still in the ignition. Letting out a sigh of relief, I slowly turned the key, but I got no response. Not even the dash lights flickered with any signs of life. "Good thing it's a manual," I said to myself, trying to keep my spirits up. I put the truck in neutral and stepped out, bracing myself against the cab and giving it a push with everything my good leg had to offer. The truck slowly rolled, and I jumped in as the slope of the driveway took over and did the rest. After putting the clutch in and shifting it into first gear, I waited to pick up enough speed. At the end of the driveway, I turned the truck onto the street, following the slope until satisfied. I held my breath as I released the clutch and felt the truck jerk, jump-starting it. The dash came to life with lights and gauges. I allowed myself to smile, with the knowledge that I didn't have to walk all the way back to the house. But then I noticed that the gas gauge didn't pop up much when the truck started, making me doubt that I would even make it back. It was not far before the truck was on fumes, probably why they never left. I shifted through the gears and made my way out of town, being sure to avoid the vicinity of the crazy man. A few more twists and turns, and I was back on the same road I came in on, passing all the same sights I had seen on my way into town. The school, the houses with no signs of life, and once again the roadblock, just as I had left it, with its collection of horrors spread about the landscape. I started to doze off. Despite the rough terrain I was driving over to avoid the traffic jam on the road. The lights of the truck began to dim as I drifted off, but when I sideswiped a car, it jarred me awake. I slapped myself and shook my head, trying to remember tricks to stay awake on long road trips. Only, most of the tricks wouldn't work. There was no radio to crank or gas station to stop at for a fresh soda. I rolled the windows down and pushed myself to keep my eyes open. I scanned from the mirrors to the street back to the gauges to see how much gas I had. The passing trees were hypnotizing, as were the lines in the street changing from solid to dotted to a mixture of both. I tried not to stare at any one thing too long. "Just a little longer," I said. I turned onto our road and felt the house get closer. "Hang in there." The truck's fuel gauge popped on, and the warning ping snapped me out of my daze. "Keep awake!" I yelled at myself, gripping the wheel with white knuckles. At last, I saw the pile of brush I had pulled out of the way. The truck started to sputter and jerk. I put the clutch in and let the truck coast as far as it could, getting every bit of distance out of the tank. I came to a stop and wasted no time grabbing my rifle and pack. Upon stepping out of the truck, I put too much pressure on my bad leg, which immediately gave out. I let out an uncontrollable screech of pain as the section around the belt throbbed. Suddenly terrified, I realized that despite the condition of my leg, I could hardly feel below the gunshot. I felt around the tourniquet numbly and recalled the dangers about using one. I struggled to my feet, not sure if my heart was racing from panic or the loss of blood. Exhausted, I continued up the driveway, unnerved at what the events of the night would do to Saul and Lily. The realization of the condition of the surrounding area and the people that inhabited it. What might happen to me as a result of it? Attempting to distract myself, I focused on my breathing, labored as it was despite the slow pace I was walking. My heartbeat throbbed in my ears rhythmically as my vision dimmed from exertion. "One step at a time," I told myself as I rounded the first corner and tried not to think of how long the driveway was. The slightest bit of pressure made my entire leg throb in agony, yet was oddly comforting in that at least I had some feeling below the tourniquet. The pain reassured me that my lower leg wasn't dead yet. My pace slowed as my strength faded. The soaked material around the wound tugged at my skin as I moved. Even as slow as I was walking, my heart pounded in my chest as if I had just run a marathon. Sweat poured from my forehead with the effort. My body was clearly trying to tell me I was only moments away from shutting down. Just keep moving. Every step brings you that much closer. Just then I heard a rustling ahead of me. I deliriously glanced around, looking for any signs of movement in the woods. I picked up my pace as much as possible at the sight of a flash of gray darting between the trees and resisted the urge to freeze from the anxiety at what might be lurking in the woods. I panicked. My heart pounded in my chest, trying to keep up with my body's demands on it. Yet despite its racing, all would be lost if I bled out. Overwhelmed, I slumped to my knees, defeated, unable to continue. The pain of the impact with the ground shot through my leg and sent a flash of sobering shock through the rest of my body. It wouldn't be long now. It didn't even hurt much anymore. All my ambition, passion, goals, fears fled as my warmth dwindled. If I concentrated, I could feel it leave me, the ground rapidly absorbing it with my blood. The world around me started to fade. As I drifted off, I heard rustling in the dead leaves around me. Glancing instinctively at my rifle at my side, I tried to reach for it, but the overall effort somehow seemed too great. My fingers gripped it, but I lacked the strength to use it. I surrendered to my fate, defeated, weak, and full of regret at the thought of either Lily or Saul finding my remains. I spotted flashes of gray out of the corner of my eye, then felt bumping and nudging on my body. Despite my condition, they didn't attack. Instead, they continued to swarm around me, poking and prodding endlessly until I heard the distant sound of Bruno. As he approached, the wolves scattered and left only the two of us. His booming barks eventually dwindled. The sense of urgency was lost on me as an overwhelming need for sleep took its place. It seemed like a distant problem for someone else to manage. To be honest, I hardly felt the gunshot anymore. The cool leaves beneath my cheek offered comfort. "No, no, no!" I heard Saul shout as he wrenched me to my feet. "Just a little farther." I lumbered along with Saul. He was more carrying me than me walking under my own power. I was dizzy and weak, and my feet hardly felt as if they were even touching the ground. "Cold," I sputtered as I clung to Saul. "I know you are. Almost there." Saul frantically swiped the kitchen counter clear, letting the plates and flower arrangements that had been on them crash to the floor. "You need to go to a hospital." "No hospital," I managed to force out. My hands shook as I clenched my chest in an attempt to get warm. "Not there." Saul fought me as he rolled me onto the counter. Feeling as if I was on a slab of ice, I resisted and tried to curl up in a ball. Saul shouted in protest, swatted my arms out of the way, and used his weight to hold me down. Finally, I relented, too weak to resist. "I need my red bag from my closet downstairs. A blanket, some pillows, and clean towels," Saul yelled to someone. I squinted down my leg to see where Saul was working under the overhead lights, which were at full power. His hands were a red blur as they moved quickly over my leg to assess the situation. "Gunshot!" Saul yelled in disbelief as he looked over the damage to my leg. "Talk to me, Vince. What did you see? What's wrong with the hospital?" I slowly rolled the question around in my mind and tried to make sense of it. "There isn't one," I managed to croak. I was shaking more violently, chilled to my bones. "I gathered that. What was wrong with it? Too busy? No one there?" Something was different about his voice. It sounded spotty, still frantic but brittle. I watched as he dug through a bag, pulling out various metallic tools. His white shirt was now accented with red cuffs. "Burned," I said finally, as I felt a second set of hands elevate my feet and spread a warm blanket across my frame, but leaving my wounded leg exposed. The warmth of the blanket helped with the cold, but I continued to shake uncontrollably. "Who shot you? Why did they shoot you?" Saul inquired, as I felt him cutting the material around my injury. "He's sweating badly but feels cold," I heard Lily's voice say softly as she laid a hand on my forehead. "His pulse is racing too." Saul loosened the belt around my leg and lifted the material off the wound. Warmth flooded my leg as I heard Saul shout his concerns. "Only saw one person." I struggled with every word. "He was the one watching us. The rest of the town is lost." I drifted away, thinking about something else as the welcome heat pooled around my lower back and took away much of the bite the cold slab had to offer. I closed my eyes to block out the bright light from the lamps above me. A hard slap across my cheek knocked my head sideways. For a second, it hurt enough to take my attention off my leg, but my eyes felt like they rolled back before he delivered another sobering blow, this time across the other side. "Not yet," I heard Saul say, as well as some unmentionable expletives enhancing his frustration. "Don't sleep. There will be plenty of time for that later. Where's my Jeep? Tell me what happened to my Jeep." I struggled to reason why that was important now. A coppery taste flooded my mouth from where Saul had struck me. "The Jeep? Why did he attack you?" Lily asked, wiping my forehead with a warm, wet towel. I thought about it for a moment and opened my mouth to respond, but only succeeded in rolling my head over and voiding my stomach. "His heart is racing. He's lost a lot of blood. He's going into shock. His heart is racing because it has less blood to carry the oxygen, so his body tries to make up for it by recycling what it has faster. The problem isn't his heart. He's young and strong. His heart should be able to handle the added stress. The problem is it will also cause him to bleed out sooner," Saul explained in a taut voice as he dug around in my pack and pulled out the whiskey I had grabbed from town. "You couldn't just let it be. You had to play hero and do your best to get yourself killed. I hope it was worth it." Saul cracked open the bottle and soaked every possible part of the wound. "It looks like the bullet missed the bone. A clean in and out, but we gotta get his bleeding under control." He dug around his bag until he found what looked like a silver clamp. "You should consider yourself lucky. 2 inches over and it would have hit your bone. A few more over and up, and he would have blown your kickstand off. If that was the case, I would just cauterize it and tell you to walk it off. No way I'm poking around in that area." He managed a stressed laugh. I relaxed a bit as Saul dried the area he had drenched, while Lily kept pressure on my leg. I nodded off slightly as he continued to wordlessly close up the wound. "Will he be okay?" Lily asked, her voice cracking. "Hard to say. What he really needs is a hospital," Saul said as he worked. "There's no bullet in his leg, so we don't need to dig anything out and make it worse. But he's lost a lot of blood. He needs time to heal. Until then, all we can do is wait, change his dressings regularly, keep him warm, and most importantly, hydrated, preferably with juice or something with sugar in it to help speed up the process. That is, if we can get the bleeding under control." I felt like I was on display. I saw nothing but bright lights and felt hot air puffing on my cheek. I turned my head to discover the source of that hot air. Bruno's head was folded out on the counter with a concerned look as he looked on helplessly. "Your breath stinks," I managed to say, and cracked a smile. He let out a huff as he backed his head up, clearly not appreciating my comment. As uncomfortable as it was lying on the counter, it did feel good just to be back at the house. Saul continued his work, his cold hands prodding my leg as Lily darted in and out of my vision, collecting whatever Saul demanded of her. Despite Saul's battering of questions and Lily's best efforts at keeping me awake, I slipped. The world finally dimming, I became indifferent to their pleas and fell into a good, blessed sleep.